Hi, I'm Rocket. Welcome to another Whiteboarding with Rocket. In this session, I'm going to recap the February event for Swell sessions held at the Airship Laboratories in Richmond, California in partnership with Office Hours Global. And I'm going to go over some of the changes I made to the system, the backend system, and then talk a little bit about some of the issues that happened. I am going to create additional specific RFI videos about some of the situations that happened. Recap is it was a successful event. We had a great artist. Marcia was able to call the show. Some of the things that fell down were the Zoom rooms froze, one of them, the main one, so we lost audio on a regular basis, and that interrupted Marcia's calling. We had a silence on YouTube on the way out, and then we had some bumpiness with the cameras in pre-setup and a few other things. But we learned a lot. And what I really celebrate here is that the situations and the issues that we're encountering are another level above and new to the ones that we had the first time. The first time was very much a scrappy, can we get this thing to work? This time I went through and did a more requirements-based build out. One of the challenges is that we have some procedures we need to work on, and we have some more roles that we need to fill if we're going to make sure that these are smooth as expected. So we're trying to do these once a month, and hopefully in March 2026 we'll have another artist and we'll go forth and do this again. So thank you very much, everybody who helped support this, and really appreciate it. And if you have a need or desire and you're in the Bay Area and you want to help out, please reach out on Discord, and we'll talk about what's needed and how to help. And there are some virtual roles as well, some remote roles, so we can talk about that as well. But let's get started. One of the big updates this time is the integration and upgrade of a Constellation 4ME, video switcher that is. So the Constellation 4ME has 40 inputs and 24 outputs. And the 24 outputs was the thing that really drove this. And what happened at the first session was we ran out of outputs and we had to repurpose on the fly. And that became a constraint. And so thinking through and going from kind of first principles thinking with this, I decided that a 4ME, which fortunately I had access to one, I brought that in. So that we have the 10 video SDI connections from the server room to the live room. And one of those has to be a return feed, so for both tally and for viewing the output there in the room. So that leaves a potential of 9 camera feeds. And then you need to be able to send out and record the multi-views. So it could be 1 or 2 multi-views, and program. So when you add all those up, that's 12 outputs that you need. Those 12 outputs need to go to Zoom, and those 12 outputs need to be ISO recorded locally. And that if you just dedicated 1-to-1, you'd use up all 24 outputs. So one of the first thoughts I had was, well, we have this 10 by 10 video hub, this video router. We could use it, and we could take 5 of those outputs and double them, right? But I realized that the cognitive load to understand which ones are doubled and which ones aren't, it was pretty high. Like, would I do program multi-view 1, multi-view 2, and camera 1 and 2, or would I do program multi-view 1, camera 1, 2, 3? How would that work? And I realized as I was working through the routing that I had this Constellation 2ME that I was upgrading to the 4ME, and that, if you look at it right, is a 12 by 12 video hub. Okay, well, it's got 24 inputs and 12 outputs. Those 12 outputs in this case are our limiting factor. So you could take 12 of those inputs and 12 of the outputs, and that becomes your video hub. And fortunately, I had a system that had been dormant, another 2ME that had been dormant for a while, And so I was able to pull that out of its existing installation, and we ended up with two 2MEs. And what this does is give us essentially 24 by 24 video routing. So all 12 of the video, the feeds that we need to record and need to go to Zoom are going through a video hub and doubling up, right? So let me walk you through this. So the camera 1 comes into the 4ME, camera 1 comes out of the 4ME into one of the 12 by 12 video hubs. And just know from now on, I'm going to call it a 12 by 12 video hub rather than a 2ME, because that's how we're using it. And if I called it a 2ME, it would just create confusion. Okay, so that camera 1 comes into the 12 by 12. One of the outputs of the 12 by 12 goes to Zoom, and one of the outputs of the 12 by 12 goes to the ISO record. And we do that for all 9 potential cameras. We do that for Multiview 1, Multiview 2, and Program. And that way you have essentially 12 outputs from the 4ME going to 24 destinations, half recording, half Zoom room. Now I've treaded over this enough. I think you've got it. You don't need me to go over this again. I have that displayed here on the whiteboard as, you know, here's the 12 outputs, or here's the from the live room to the 4ME, and those going to these 2 sets of locations. Now, I've got more detail about exactly which ones are going to what recording devices and what Zoom rooms. That's detail we can cover in another time. But just know that this allowed me to use 12 outputs of the 4ME rather than 24 or some other number that didn't make sense. And the reason we need these additional outputs, so we've got 12 outputs dedicated for this, and then we have 12 open outputs. And some of those 12 outputs that are open will go to the YouTube encoder, to HyperDeck recording. We've got some going out to the viewing area, the return feed in the live room. There's also a return feed in the server room. So I'm sitting in the server room and I've got a little display there. And then we've got one out in the viewing area where people can send outside the live room and see what's going on. And then we are sending one and potentially 2 to sound engineers. And that way they have a way to independently switch between the cameras. So that gives us 6 of those additional outputs, 6 or 7 of those additional outputs get eaten up there. And so now we have this potential energy of a handful of more outputs that we can use when needed, right? Which we know just the way the whole thing goes, we will need that flexibility over time. So that's the biggest update as part of this whole system, is the way these are routed through video hubs to the destinations. Now, I decided as part of this to just go ahead with the potential 9 cameras in the room. And one of the things I wanted to highlight here is, so 8 of those cameras are definitely, I think of them as they're going from the live room to the switcher. Now they can be changed because it's all patch panel, but in my head, this is the way it is most of the time. We've got one of the that can be flexible. It can be, and it's definitely a patch, and I made it so it's easy to patch in the server room. And then one is the return feed. So that's 8 going from the live room, 1 flexi, and then 1 is a return. Now the reason for the flexi is thinking about the idea of having a Zoom call with super fans that can talk to the band. Some of these sessions, this is a potential, it's an idea, and hopefully before June timeframe this year, we'll at least have one of those. There's a lot of extra work that needs to go into it, and I'll talk about that in a future video. But the idea of putting a display in there and having a tiles view of the people watching, potentially bringing up somebody to ask a question of the band, feeling like it's a dialogue. These are all ideas that are out there, and I know at least one of those SDI feeds would be used for that. It could be more than one, but for sure one. When it comes to the recording devices, we have an extreme ISO and a regular ISO ATEM. The extreme ISO has 8 recording channels. The regular ISO has 4. That's so a total of 12. And the way I divided that across is the extreme will have program, the multi-view, 1, and then camera 1 through 6, which is going to be kind of generally, this is the second one of them. Turned out to be that was a pretty solid setup. So only if we go above 6 cameras would we need the second extreme, and that'll be cam 7 through 9, and then the second multi-view. And the reason for a second multi-view is in Blackmagic world, you've got the 2 big tiles at the top. You can change this, but this is how it kind of standard set up. 2 big tiles at the top in the multi-view. One is preview, one is program, and then 8 smaller tiles beneath that, which are the 8 cameras. And if you go to 9 cameras, you're going to need another multi-view. And with the 4ME, it can have up to 4 multi-views, which is nice because you can route those all over different places. But we're really concerned about those 2. Then when it comes to the Zoom rooms, each of the Zoom rooms can have 4 signals, and that can be input or output. But for this case, this is all about these become cameras in Zoom. And when the Zoom room joins Zoom, it shows up with 4 different video feeds. And in this case, we went ahead and did program, multi-view, and then cam 1, 2 as the first Zoom room. And then just the rest of the cams all the way up to in the Zoom room 3, you have the second multi-view. So that setup is pretty solid. Now, a few things I got to do as part of this is with the Zoom Room's custom AV controller, which is an app that runs on, in this case, it's running on a Mac, but it can run on Windows or I think even Linux. It's an app that runs and you connect it to your Zoom Rooms and it becomes a gateway to run OSC commands. It's more than that, but one of the things that we're using it for is I can use Companion, the BitFocus Companion, to send OSC commands to this custom AV controller, and it then sends a signal onto the Zoom room. So it's a way to automate. There's not a two-way information exchange yet, so I can't update Companion with the status. Like if I've muted a room through these OSC commands, it doesn't show up in the Companion app as muted, so I can't change that part yet. I know that some folks in the community are working on building out a Companion native app module for that, which would be awesome because this really highlighted the power and the limitations of the OSC commands and the Companion module stuff. So what I ended up doing is Companion would send this OSC commands, and how I used them for this time was I would be able to join or leave a meeting. So I programmed the meeting details into Companion, and I would say join all. So it would send a signal to all 3 Zoom rooms to join the meeting, and there they'd show up. And then I could hit another button which would change the names. And so I would name these signals corresponding to these different indicators: program, multi-view 1, cam 1 through 9, multi-view 2, right? So I'd hit a button and it would automatically rename all of those. That's really nice because it makes the navigating what's what much easier. And then I could also mute and unmute. I will talk a little bit about the Zoom Room challenges here in a second as part of the RFI process, but I just wanted to note that this turned out to be very, very powerful. There was a couple of questions about were we going to go 60 frames a second, or we're going to go 59.957 or 59.94 or 29.97. And we decided to go with the 29.97 for this because the file sizes were probably going to be enormous over here. And then there are a handful of limitations on the cameras about the signal they send out that I have yet to investigate and understand. I was taking input from the experts on that one. So we went ahead and did 29.97. And the reason I bring that up is there is a way to use these OSC commands to tell Zoom to change frame rate, which is pretty sweet. Now you do have to go into each of the, you do have to make some changes at the switcher level as well. So you have to go to each of the switchers and say, this is new frame rate, but it works. And so I was able to have a lot of flexibility between frame rates, but I didn't leverage it this time. We stayed with a 2997. So I'm going to talk about some of the major RFIs as part of this, and do a little bit of a shallow dive, not a deep dive, into what happened and what we're going to do about it. So one of the first ones is probably the biggest one for me, is there was no audio being sent to YouTube at the beginning of the show. We had the countdown. There was expectations that there was expectation gaps and understanding gaps about what the countdown meant. We'll figure that out. That's one of those things. Like when I say, if I'm on comms and I say we're live, what does that actually mean? What is the expectation of we're live? Right? These are all procedural things. And I've been doing live streams every week for my church for 10 years. I know that, and I have a whole bunch of assumptions about that have been baked in over time. So when I hit the go live button, I have 99.999% confidence that things are live, but I've built that confidence in that process over that amount of time. And I carried that assumptions into this experience. So when I hit go live, I assumed everything was working, and there was a handful of things that I didn't have in front of me and confirmed before I said we were live. We will fix this next time. So there was at least a minute, maybe even 2 minutes, where there was no signal, audio signal into YouTube. Now what happened? So procedurally, we know that we need to fix that. We need to have somebody who is actively listening for the signal, making sure that we're getting signal before we go live, and then as we go live, we need some confirmation. So we know that, and they're dedicated machines, somebody remotely that gives a thumbs up on comms. These are all things that we'll do for the next show. In this case, this is a very odd situation. It took me a while. I started looking around. I'm like, why are we not getting signal? I'm seeing signal coming in from the audio chain. It's coming into the switcher, but it's not getting out of the switcher into the encoder or the recorders. What's going on? And eventually I realized, I looked at the software switcher control panel, and I went to the audio, and you just got to scroll all the way to the right. And for whatever reason, the main output from the switcher the fader had been dropped all the way to zero. All the way down, not to zero, just it had been all the way down. And I very consciously never go into the audio control panel for the switcher to do one thing usually, which is to say, turn on the audio for a channel, not to adjust levels. So this was like completely, what in the heck is going on? I'm not defending myself, just recognizing that I carried a lot of assumptions along the way of like, I never go into that, so why would I even check it? Right. So that was a big miss on our part. Now we've corrected it. We've taken the live mix from Elad and put it in there and made a program feed out of it. And we're working on color correcting the output. But the live stream itself, we had a big miss on. Another thing, and along these audio challenges with YouTube, we had a similar one with the ISO records and the hyperdeck records. No audio was flowing through the system, and that turns out to be an audio channel needs to be turned on in the 12x12 video hubs, right? So one of the audio channels was muted, and it needs to be turned on. And I have a whole bunch of thoughts around this, and what I'm trying not to do is create too much complexity. Like, if I need to do more than one video signal out to Zoom Room or to record, how do I do that? I'm gonna at this point state that there's gonna be one video signal from the room in the room, and that is gonna be the program mix or the live mix from Elad into the system. and not worry about taking multiple things from different places and trying to route them in the video switcher to destinations. I'm not going to do that. If we ever encounter the situation in which we need that, I will readdress it. But for right now, the whole thing is in my head, this is all about taking a band and making the different camera angles available to folks in the community, as well as the multi-view, enabling Marcia or potentially other remote TDs to call the show and cut the show, not to try and send individual audio channels out as part of that. I think that's too much for this. The last major thing that happened is the Zoom room froze. And it was the primary Zoom room. So it's the one with program feed, with multi-view 1 and cam 1 2. And it also is sending out the audio signal. Now, a couple of things happened here. So just in the middle of this, I get, Marcia speaks up on comms and says, oh, looks like we got the program feed's frozen, the multi-view is frozen. I'm like, what? This has never happened. And I had run seriously 24-hour meetings over the course of the week and a half before to confirm that Zoom was going to perform and it was working. And I would just kick this off and I'd have them all up and I'd use it to program things and I'd use it to test the rename and all this kind of stuff. And I just have them running constantly. So it was very, very unsettling to have the Zoom Room app freeze midstream. And it happened a number of times. And the first time it happened, it was a big fumble to rejoin, rename, and unmute and get the camera set up and everything like that, because it was like, I knew how to do it the first time and it was like, I don't even want to think about that again. So having a routine wasn't part of the mix yet. So I figured out the routine very quickly. And one of the characteristics that happened here, we're using an office hours account, Zoom account, to host the meeting. And the Zoom rooms are in a different account. And the challenge with that is you can't assign co-host to a Zoom room in a different account. Can't automatically assign that. And I locked down the meeting in a couple of ways. Like I'm not going to let participants accidentally come on video or accidentally unmute. This is not about people will go off and do that. No, this is more about just accidentally joining the meeting, being unmuted and interrupting things. I don't want that. And same thing with the video side of thing. So what I did is in the host tools, I disabled participants being able to come on camera or unmute. So host and co-host can do that. So the Zoom room would join, I'd have to assign it co-host, then I'd have to come off a video, and then I could rename it. Right? There was a couple of times when I ran the rename script and it renamed it the wrong thing, and because I had done that differently. So eventually I got to a routine, and then I tried, I was like, okay, it was happening enough that I was going to do a quick OSC command to do the come off a video, and then I couldn't get to the OSC documentation in the Zoom Room custom AV controller. Still can't. Don't know what's up with that. I know that there's a whole bunch of changes going on at Zoom right now, so maybe that's a thing with those changes. I'm expecting that'll get fixed in the next week. But anyway, so I ended up having to do a lot of manual click and tap and blah, 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 that kind of stuff just to get the Zoom Room back and running. And this would, of course, disrupt everybody in the community who's joining with vMix or Zoom ISO or whatever, trying to pull down all the feeds, because it would rename things and they'd lose the video and it would disconnect. Very, very, very painful. So I did some double clicking after the show into what's different between that system, because the other two systems were just fine and they worked just great the whole way through. I think one of the Zoom rooms, Zoom Room 3 or Studio 3 dropped, but I think it was because I hit the wrong button. And this is definitely a lesson on the leave buttons. So I've got join buttons and I've got leave buttons on the Zoom, the companion. And what I want to be able to do is when I go to leave, I need to press and hold the button to leave. I don't want to just accidentally tap it and have it leave. And I've done that for a number of different places, for power, for other things like stopping record. You have to press and hold to stop the record, things like that. So I think I think I accidentally hit leave meeting, brushed the button, and it left Studio 3. It did not crash. So the difference between the Zoom, the operating system, so they're all Mac Mini M1s, they're all 8 gig 256, so base level, and they've worked like champs for years. So I'm not thinking it's the underlying hardware. They'll have DeckLink Duo 2s. They've all been upgraded to the latest firmware a few months ago, and the DeckLink Duo 2s have been terrific and stable and solid. I think it is the Studio One, the one that crashed, is running Tahoe, and the other ones are running Sequoia, so the previous major Mac OS. So I am going to pull out that Studio One Mac Mini, and I'm going to put in one that's running Sequoia and install the software. And then I'm going to run a bunch of tests. Now, I don't know how to recreate this because I don't know if it was a matter of having a bunch of participants. Because again, like I said, 24-hour meetings with no issues before that. Was it a bunch of video feeds that were coming in? Because what would happen is I'd join the video feed, the Zoom, all 3 Zoom rooms would join a meeting. I'd have 1 or 2 other participants in there, but almost all the cameras were black because we didn't have camera hookups. So I need to figure out, can I loop a video in there? Can I distribute some video just to give it some stress on the system and test it? I'd love to be able to do that and cause it to fail and then swap out and do it again and see if that fixes it. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. And that will be a challenge. So I need to think about coordinating with the community on building up a system and having a bunch of joins and run some tests. I know that Guy and Andy all have ways to launch multi-participant meetings with looping videos. So maybe do that and go from there. So those were the 3 kind of major RFIs that we had, or issues that we encountered: the YouTube, the audio on the records, and the Zoom room crash. I will say that the crew was fantastic. We're getting better at the setup in the room. It was bumpy for a little bit, and the whole concept now is we have a lot of the block and tackle equipment will stay in the studio. So a lot of the cabling and tripods and stuff like that, lights, will stay there in a secure area in the studio. And then the cameras, I'll bring the cameras in and out as needed. And we'll get better at the setup. And the whole idea is 10-hour day. So 1 10-hour day. So get in there at 8 a.m., be set up by 11, have the artist in between 11 and noon, rehearse starting at 2, and then the show starts at 4, and that goes till 6, right? So nice 10-hour day. Breakdown, the nice thing about the breakdown is the loadout is it can be relatively quick, and because a lot of this stuff is going to stay on site. Right, with that, I'm Rocket, and this has been another Whiteboarding with Rocket.